Hi, Bowen. First, let me thank the organizers of Vision for Life conference for inviting me to make this keynote address. In my address, I will focus on the rights of fishing people and how, when these rights are violated or in a context of lack of rights, how they are pushed into poverty. And I will also take up some issues of management of the small scale fisheries sector. I will start my address with this picture, which shows the fishing system, life below water and life above water. Our knowledge of life below water, that is, the fishery resources, is quite rich, while our knowledge of the life above water or the fishing people is quite insufficient to understand why these people do what they do. Ask yourself, what do we know about them? Now, when it comes to fish, every known fish is properly classified, well classified. Whereas about the socio-economic characteristics of the people, fishing people, what do we know? Very little. Do we know about their aspirations, their beliefs, their values, their legal system? Very little. And but of course, there are a few things which are commonly known. We know that these fishing people catch fish, sell them, and earn an income. At the same time, we have this idea that fishermen are poor. Now, poverty in fisheries is often related to the, the particular type of resources, the common property nature resources, or the open access. And fishery resources, which are common property, as Garrett Harding has showed us, they are likely to subject to the tragedy of the commons, where individual operators have no incentive to manage the resources, which will finally result in resource degradation and human ill-being. And here is a case which is, which is quite clearly, reveal the need for management. And I would like here to show what Chris Benney in his seminal article, Fishing Rhymes with Poverty, mentioned two contrasting interpretations of the relationship between poverty and fisheries. And the first one, they are poor because they are fishermen. And secondly, they are poor, they are fishermen because they are poor. Now, when you say that they are fishermen because they are poor, which shows that poor people, in the absence of any alternative employment and low opportunity cost, they they take up fisheries as last resort employment. So therefore, they are fishermen because they are poor. And then open access fisheries, as we have seen, will lead to their over exploitation, high because of high fishing pressure, free entry, and the 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 fish catches will decline, and in the context of low opportunity cost, this will, finally the people will end up in low incomes and poverty. So they are poor because they are fishermen. So in any case, the both the both interpretations are important in understanding fisheries, um, of especially uh, the small scale fisheries. Now, it is a clear case for management. On one hand, you have degrading resources. On the other hand, you have people whose livelihoods have been threatened and who are pushed into poverty. Now, when it comes to management, we are reminded of the early, propositions or early management models in the 1950s, that of Gordon and the other workers who proposed bioeconomic models as, you know, the most efficient management models, where the aim had been uh, achieving economic efficiency and profit maximization. But Profit maximization and economic efficiency are found to be insufficient goals because they ignore the issue of social responsibility, distributive justice, right to food, right to basic social services, and so on. So, now among the many approaches that have been used to manage uh, small scale fisheries, we have the rights based approach, which emerge as highly relevant and crucial approach in addressing a wide range of issues confronted by the fisheries sector. Now, traditionally, when you say rights, we we spoke about access rights or fishing rights. Now, establishing access rights to a natural resource for the poor represents the common legal and moral claim that is widely accepted and recognized. However, arguments about fishing rights tend to undermine the relationship that exists between poverty, resource access, and the wider economic and political context. So today, we are concerned with both access rights and human rights. In fact, human rights have gained significant importance, even as a development approach applicable not only to fisheries but even to other sectors as well. Now, I'm showing you some of these some more important or commonly, discussed human rights in case of small-scale fisheries: equality, non-discrimination, right to social security, right to work, favorable remuneration, right to decent standard of living, security, motherhood and childhood, and right to education. Now, the right based approach to development argues that human rights are integral to development outcomes. In respect of natural resource management, such an approach will achieve both human development goals and resource sustainability goals. In a right based approach, development strategies are based on people's claims to their right to receive basic social services, right to adequate food, decent work, social security, and the right to a decent, dignified life. Now, when people's social, economic, and cultural rights, and sometimes civic and political rights are violated, they are likely to experience poverty and marginalization. Therefore, poverty is closely related to rights, lack of rights or violation of rights. Now, when it comes to poverty, traditionally poverty was linked to low income. So, but as we all know, low income is only one facet of poverty. Today, we speak of poverty as having many facets, which are embedded in all spheres of activity: economic, social, environmental, and so on. Low income, lack of physical and economic access to basic social services, lack of social security, lack of access to adequate food and alternative employment, lack of voice in decision making, insecure tenure and resource access are all manifestations of poverty. In the words of my colleague Sven Gentoft, poverty means exclusion, not just from wealth, but also from the potential for change, from the future. Poor people have no future. Now, poverty and vulnerability are quite closely linked, and people are made vulnerable not because only because of poverty, but think of the fishery sector as a whole. It's not only poverty, but you know, lack of rights and the particular nature of fisheries: open access, unpredictability, seasonality, operational hazard, weather dependent, output, oligopsony, middleman oligopsonies, climate change impact, lack of social security, social exclusion, and the recently heard blue injustices. They all uh, make people vulnerable. Now, vulnerability is a factor that exposes people to various risks and shocks, leading to destitution. A system is vulnerable when it is exposed to risk and shocks. The challenge of Development not only includes the elimination of persistent poverty, but also the removal of vulnerability to sudden and severe destitution. And when you are vulnerable, of course, you have to cope with vulnerability. Now, the vulnerability can be separated from the act of coping. The coping is a capacity to respond and to recover from shocks, an ability which is known as resilience. Thus, vulnerability and coping are two sides of the same coin. The more one is vulnerable, the less one has the capacity to cope. So, vulnerable people need to cope with it and become resilient to make their livelihood sustainable, for which they need to have access to livelihood capitals. As we are reminded by the sustainable livelihood approach, people need to have access to assets or capitals such as the natural, physical, financial, human, and social, and which they combine to develop strategies that will make their livelihoods sustainable. And so the vulnerability is something that people want to es- escape. Now, a few words about the role of women in coping with vulnerability, which is quite important due to the fact that this role is not um, surfacing very well, or this is hidden somewhere, and this which is also being ignored. Women play a very important role in fisheries. Many are engaged in marketing and fish processing activities, and which bring in supplementary incomes that uh, helps to smoothen intertemporal flows of fishing incomes, which are fluctuating daily. And in fact, the supplementary incomes perform an insurance role. But the role of women, they are often, ignored. Their rights are being violated. Are they given equal opportunities of earning incomes, employment, and to decent work? Same remuneration for same work. In fact, the men are paid higher than the women. And the motherhood, childcare, will they do they receive? No. And as UNICEF clearly identifies, equality and non-discrimination are central to gender equality, and this is what is lacking. And the governors should make sure that you empower women in order to exercise their rights and take the appropriate steps to stop discrimination against women. And here I want to show the very strong relationship between vulnerability and poverty. And people who are vulnerable are, and if you are unable to cope with vulnerability, having access to, the different types of assets or capitals, then you are pushed into poverty. And those who are poor and due to their low incomes and poverty, they may not have access to the required, assets and capitals in order to cope with vulnerability and make their life sustainable. So vulnerability and poverty is a kind of a vicious cycle, and those who are vulnerable are fall into poverty. Those who are power become vulnerable when they are unable to cope with um, vulnerability and become resilient. So in fact, people are small scale fishers. Many are trapped in this vicious circle of vulnerability and poverty. And when you are trapped in this vicious cycle, one way uh, of escaping from this is to use your resources more intensively by using the destructive gear, environmentally unfriendly gear, to earn fast cash. And finally, what happens is in the long run, will further degrade the ecosystem and you become more vulnerable. In the words of Sven, if you don't fish, you starve. If you fish, you degrade the ecosystem and then starve. Here, the Here is a case for governance. And the governance challenge is quite evident. You need to improve the well being of the people. At the same time, you need to maintain the ecosystem health, which is the governance challenge today. And here I want to show you the, the governance system. You have the state governance and the community governance. And what are you going to govern? There are two systems to be governed. The system to be governed consists of the ecosystem and the human system. As the custodian of the natural resources, the state is predominantly involved in sustainable use of resources. While the goal of the human system is human well-being. In reaching their objectives, the two actors, the community and the state, they are guided by their own laws. The state by the state laws, community by the community laws. And there might arise clashes between the different laws when they do not move along the same direction. So, what is required is what is required in the governance challenge is to address this clash, and while ensuring that the two goals are reached. So, here you see the opening of a space for kind of merging of the two sets of laws, merging of the state law and the community law, or merging of or the space for partnership formation between the community and the state. In fact, this is the birth of interactive governance or the birth of co-management, and where the responsibility of resource management is shared between the government and the other resource users. And in fact, co-management has been an institutional model which has been used to implement rice-based fisheries management. In fact, in co-management, what is important is empowerment. In fact, empowerment is what co-management is all about, as it involves bringing in previously excluded, disenfranchised, and sometimes alienated user groups into the decision making table. And if there's no empowerment, there's no co management, as Sven notes. So, uh, the co management could the be extended to integrated coastal zone management platforms in a context of the presence of multi-stakeholders, such as in the coastal zone, where you have different types of stakeholders using the same coastal resources. So whether it is co-management, pure co-management between state and the fishers, or it is an integrated coastal zone management among the various stakeholders, it has to be a very well integrated platform, integration of all sectors. It has to be an inclusive platform, inclusive of all stakeholders, including women and marginalized groups. It has to be a participatory platform, ensuring effective participation of all through training and capacity building. And it has to be a holistic platform where you look at the system as a whole. And as my final remarks, I would like to show you the importance of the FAO voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable fisheries. Now, SSF guidelines place a high priority on the realization of human rights and on the need to attend to vulnerable groups. Of course, guidelines, they are not a panacea, but they address a wide range of issues constraining sustainable um, fisheries development. Now, these guidelines try to achieve uh, the goal of securing a sustainable small-scale fisheries sector by through the promotion of human rights-based approach, by empowering fishers, including women, to participate in decision-making processes and to assume responsibilities for sustainable use of fishery resources and placing emphasis on the needs of vulnerable and marginalized groups. And with these final remarks, let me wind up my address and I thank you all for listening. Thank you very much.